I'd like to acknowledge that this episode of the Teach New South Wales podcast was recorded on the homelands of the Darug people. I'd like to pay respect to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening today. Welcome to the Teach New South Wales podcast, a podcast by teachers for teachers. Welcome back to another episode of the Teach New South Wales podcast. Today we have a special guest. Welcome, Ben, to the couch.
Thank you.
Or Mr. North, as I so fondly remember you.
As you called me. Yes.
From an SLSO to a Chief Education Officer, Ben has worked with the department for nearly 20 years in a variety of roles across the system. And what I was referencing then was that Ben used to be my high school English teacher. So
That's right. And you survived and you became a teacher.
I did.
Must
And
have done something right.
my fondest memory was when you gave me the most improved in Year 10 English, and I will
Yes.
never forget it.
That's right.
Yeah.
No, very proud. You should be very proud of that. You should have that in your classroom now.
It's framed up there somewhere
Yeah,
on the
good,
wall.
good.
Today, Ben joins us to provide some expert insights into the public school system and catering to diverse learners. Welcome to the couch.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, we love to, get our guests settled, warm them up for an episode of the Teaching South Wales podcast with an icebreaker. So, Ben, what are you reading, watching, or listening to at the moment?
I am currently watching. I'm going back through some really bad 90s movies.
Oh, okay.
90s action movies, crime thrillers, whole lot of things that really probably should have been left in the 90s, but it has been very relaxing.
Is that familiar, I suppose?
Yeah. It also reminds me a lot of haircuts and a lot of things that we should have left back there.
Well, it all comes back around, they say.
Yeah.
So maybe you're just getting ahead of the curve for the next trend.
Maybe I am. I don't think I'm on the last trend, so I've got a better chance with the next one.
I love that. I've actually been enjoying Gogglebox at the moment because it's like getting, 10 shows in one. So I
Yeah.
feel like I'm not missing out. I just get a little
Pressing all the information.
a little dose of everything, and I get to see what's relevant. So I think I might actually watch The Penguin after watching Gogglebox.
Yep.
They actually had high reviews of The Penguin, and I wasn't expecting to like it. I thought it looked a little bit corny on the trailer, but the way that they pitched it made it seem really good. So interested to dive into that one.
All right, Ben, tell us, what is a top tech tool that you're loving at the moment, or something that you've tried and tested?
I am somebody who, look, I work a lot with data, and I still constantly use some of my smartwatch to track my activity and exercise. Increasingly, as I get older and get busier, it's telling me how much exercise I'm not doing. But
relate.
it's, very useful in helping me just keep track of my health stats.
Yeah.
And, activity levels, it's easy to get caught behind a desk or
Yeah.
not move as much as I really should. So it's something I rely on more now.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the function on mine that tells me to stand up if I've been sitting
Yes.
down too long. I find that really helpful. And often when I was wearing it in the classroom as well, I'd be like, okay, brain break, we've been sitting too long. Like if I was reading a text or something to the students, and it was a nice little reminder. So shout out to the smartwatches out there.
Love that.
Siobhan, what about you? Top tech tool?
Top tech tool. There's one that integrates polling functions into Google Slides. So I find that instead of dragging people away from a slide deck by getting them to fill in a Google form, there's something called, I think it's called Mentimeter.
Yeah.
There's another polling function that you can just embed straight into the Google Slides, and people can interact with it then and there, and the data comes up in real time for them, or the results come up in real time. So I like that one.
Very cool. I'm already thinking of a million things we could do in the
Yeah,
classroom
good
with
for
that.
student engagement, or good for engaging staff in professional learning, or doing a bit of a vibe check in that moment of how everyone's feeling. So yeah.
Even like morning routine, I'm thinking come in, if they have BYOD, for example, could check off their attendance in that manner if they get on their Google Classroom or something like that.
100%.
Okay, so you have to live without one item for the rest of the school year. This is like living on a desert island. You ready? Which one are you choosing to go without? A whistle, a whiteboard marker, or a printer?
Printer.
Oh,
Whistle,
Helps.
I could not do without a whistle.
Yeah,
It's a good
I'm
one,
with you on
isn't it?
that one.
Very early learned the value of having a good proper sports whistle on the keys at all times, not just for sport, although really handy for that, but just for all manner of scenario situations. So definitely need a whistle. Printer, I think, something I think about across my teaching career is something I needed less and less,
Yeah.
but still very useful and valuable. There's incredibly important to have that, sometimes that physical resource in front of students. But that's a big change for me. And when every now and then I go into the garage and find boxes of teaching resources, programs and things that I studiously photocopied and organised it's quite phenomenal how in just my, time teaching, so much more has become digitized. And so I think that's my pick.
Yeah, 100%.
I am thinking the other day I was talking to Siobhan about this. I found my professional experience folders and I had printed all of my lessons that I prepared. So it was like these 2 big folders with like binders with all of my lessons like all printed out. And I was like, wow, I wouldn't know that girl now because
What's the point?
everything's on like my school use OneNote for programming because it's a lot more collaborative as well. But I know lots of my friends and colleagues, they use like Google Classrooms as well. But even in that span of like being a pre-service teacher to now, like so vastly different. Like what was I going to do if I left my binder at home?
Oh, I am old enough teaching that, still working on overheads.
Yeah.
Photocopying at least I could photocopy onto overhead transparencies. Like I still occasionally find.
Yeah, but nothing better than an annotated poem on the overhead.
Oh, yeah. Some of them I will never throw out.
So
just
good.
because of how important they are. But it's quite phenomenal. Just so much more we can do now.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we think of the students that, are in our classrooms at the moment. What's the world going to look like when they're the future teachers?
Yep.
Crazy.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned indeed.
Well, let's find a little bit more about you. Can you tell us a little bit about why you chose teaching as a career and how you kind of ended up working your way through the public school system to see it at lots of different levels?
Yeah, for me, it goes back a long way. It's no one influence, but I definitely had some positive influences when I was at school. I think something I realised as I got towards the end of school, like my time as a school student, is that I was really interested in schools. Like the school I was at, I remember going into there was a little storeroom meeting room where our high school timetablers used to physically organise the timetable for all of the classes back on physical pieces of card, before computerised timetable software. And I still remember looking at that and just being so interested at the range of curriculum and classes and everything else. And it was probably in year 12 doing the HSC that I remember having moments where I was explaining and helping some of my friends and peers in the class understand some of the concepts. And I found that was something I could be sometimes effective at. If I really knew what I was talking about, I felt, I got that sense of what became professional satisfaction out of helping somebody learn and understand. And I think for me, it's the key thing for me has been learning. I've enjoyed learning, I've continued studying, but as a teacher, in any role I've done in our system, you're constantly learning. And that's anything from the changes that come into the way we work and the kind of the craft we do as teachers through to policies, practices, but communities and schools and students. You're learning about, it could be anywhere between 30 to 200 young people, new young people each year. You're learning about them as people. And I think for me, that's what, has meant I've never really felt bored at all.
Yeah. It's definitely a profession that keeps you on your toes every day and challenges you at a lot of different levels. Like I think for me, I really enjoyed teaching Year 12 Advanced English because they would challenge me in a number of ways. I also enjoyed the challenge of making the learning bite-sized for my Year 7s, for example. So it's, you have to be a complex person to teach these complex humans, and that in turn is really rewarding. So I can see why you chose the greatest profession of them all.
Yes, the profession that makes all other professions.
Exactly right. And what about your experience throughout the system in terms of going into your little niche pockets? I know that high potential and gifted education was one of them. What sort of led you there?
Not necessarily an intentional career move, but more I see it as being all part of one career. and all part of teaching. I'm in a non-school based teaching role. I'm still, a teacher. I maintain my accreditation. I still have had opportunities to teach. It's just the role that I have been in or I'm doing now is where I can use some of those skills or knowledge or expertise and help share, influence, contribute to the whole public education system. And, for me, what I find really important and valuable is constantly thinking that, like, as a teacher, how would this affect me? What does this mean in terms of my classroom practice or what we do in schools? And I've been really lucky to not just teach in a great range of public schools, but also visit and work with a lot of different schools and communities across the state. And that to me has just been absolutely fascinating. We have such an immense, rich, diverse public education system here that there are all kinds of schools and communities that we serve and support.
So across your career with the New South Wales public school system, you have had the opportunity to teach in different contextual settings, scenarios. Can you tell us a little bit about how that shaped you as a professional?
Yeah, I've had a really rich and diverse experience. So teaching casually while I was at university, doing some sort of in-school work, which we would now call SLSO type work, different sorts of experience, representative programs as well, but also like teaching in parts of Western Sydney, Southwest, Southern Sydney. In the high school space, one of the things, some differences between 7 to 12 and 11 to 12 contexts as well, getting different experiences. But certainly something I'm always conscious of that I've really only taught in big schools. Actually all of the schools I've taught in have been 1,000 or more students to about in terms of enrolment. And since working in kind of the education support roles that I've been in, learning what that looks like, that in our system, we've got some things and practices that we do that are very similar in some ways, but different. When you're in a school of 10 or 20 students in a small country town, or a K to 12 central school in a remote area of the state with less than 100 students, is that understanding all of those kind of differences. The one thing I will say, though, that I really hold on to and I'm strong to stress is that while, community and context is so important, we still all teach young people and humans. They are humans, and what we all share in common is our teaching practice. The way in which we teach, the way we know our students and how they learn is something that actually we all share so much. There are differences around that we need to be aware of as teachers on how we support a diverse range of learning needs. But it's that common element of our classroom practice. And that's something that, I really enjoy and still I'm a bit of a nerd of. If I ever get an opportunity to observe a lesson or be part of something, I'm just always, seeing what the teacher's doing, what the plan is, trying to work out those things there. And it just forever interests me because I think that it's that bit of our job that has the greatest daily impact. And it's sometimes the bit that we can forget about or get swept up in other big policy.
Well, it becomes almost second nature to us as well, in the sense of like, as a teacher, you know your students so well, you know how they learn, and the way you are able to take the outcomes from the syllabus and, pitch them in a way that is going to meet the needs of all those students in your classroom. It's a huge sort of practice to be able to do. And I think sometimes we take for granted how amazing teachers are in that sense of what we do day to day.
Absolutely. And it can be easy to communicate it in a way that oversimplifies just how complex it is.
Yes.
I've had a couple of great experiences where I've been able to go back to like pre-service teachers as a guest lecturer, that kind of thing, and talking to people who are only weeks into the profession. And I'm always mindful to talk about, you're entering into something that is a really challenging profession with a really rich evidence-based, incredible practice, but taking that opportunity just to observe master teachers, when you're out there and in the presence of somebody who can, like talking about whistles, can get the attention of 200 teenagers in 5 seconds.
Yeah.
And it's not just what they did at that moment. That's also probably weeks or months or years of building relationships and respect with people.
Yeah.
That, it is something I just find so fascinating and also incredibly powerful part of our profession.
It's kind of a sidebar, but talking about that, I always used to sit at assembly, and when a different teacher would run it, like my school context was over 1,000 students as well, and to watch a teacher command the attention of over 1,000 children in an outdoor learning space, SATs is an unmatched skill.
Absolutely.
It really is.
I don't know if you remember this, but at the school that I attended that you taught at, we used to have a teacher who would get up in the morning at assembly. He'd just come up, stand at the top, and he would say, "Keep to the left." And then he'd get off the stage. And everyone was like, wow, because he wanted everyone to keep to the left when they were walking the corridors. So that stuck with me forever. I was like,
Yep.
we must keep to the left because Sir said so.
Honestly, simple messaging. Simple and to the point.
Clear. Clarity. I like it.
Explicit, one would say.
Yeah.
You mentioned a few things earlier about, looking into the diverse needs of students, that every student deserves a teacher who has that evidence-based practice. What does that actually look like in terms of what works best within the classroom to ensure that our diverse learners are being catered to? I know that's a really broad question.
I think it's a really good question, and it's a question that, our profession is still grappling with. We've had the messages sometimes about you need to customize every part of the lesson for every student, and almost creating 30 lesson plans has been the side effect of that. To me, I go back to some really key, clear principles about knowing your students and how they learn.
Yeah.
And there are some really important practices about, firstly, never assuming what students do or don't know, what they can and can't do, like challenging any assumption that you might have. But just those little things that we do through formative assessments and pre-testing to find out, well, what do students know? What have they mastered? Some of those sort of formative assessment practices are just incredibly powerful for that. No matter where the student is in their learning and developmental journey, our role is to do the best we can to support them to take those next steps.
Yeah.
And to have also that expectation that everybody can learn and grow and develop is a really important part of our mindset as public educators as well.
Certainly. I mean, Shannon's a formative assessment queen in her primary school space. I've seen her spreadsheets. I've seen that she knows every single thing about every student and where they are with their progressions. Do you want to share a little bit with us about what formative assessment looks like in the primary space?
Yeah,
and how
and
it
I
can be
think
effective?
the department, I'm by no means an expert. I'd like to say I'm a lifelong learner, and I'm always keen to hear opportunities to grow. But yeah, I think as I got sort of further into my practice, probably maybe by the tail end of my second year of teaching into my third, I was really on board with the pre-assessment, and I started to see the results like just in tenfold of like how I was able to target and, provide intervention where necessary, but also provide that extension opportunity and sort of like look more towards that consolidation real world link for my students who are probably on the other end of the mastery scale of the outcomes that we were looking at that time. The department has some wonderful resources as well around like short snippets of assessments, even using like Google Forms, Microsoft Form, for example. So it's really wonderful to see the teams in the curriculum space like creating those resources on hand for our teachers to be able to use in their classroom. So that was a really great way to sort of like short, sharp, have those little tailored pre-assessments for your students.
And I found coming from an English context, English is a very heavy marking summative assessment load, but I'm big on assessing my students verbally.
Yeah.
So it might seem really just part of common practice, but going around and actually asking them informal questions and testing their knowledge on what they already know and getting a bit of a sense of where they're at in groups or individually, pulling that for a bit of conferencing as well, I find is really impactful in that space too.
Definitely. And I think as you grow in your career, you build that confidence as well with being able to have those like off the cuff conversations about where they're at with their learning and trusting yourself as a professional. I've had that conversation. I've written my anecdotal notes. Like that is part of your assessment practice. Just because it's not a piece of paper or a form filled out by the student, you still have that evidence.
Yes.
That's still absolutely, where those students are at and how they learn.
Yeah. And I think the summative part of the assessment, which as an English teacher, we sometimes give ourselves an unkind view of piles of marking or huge amounts of essays. That's something that I remember grappling with a lot as a teacher and as a head teacher as well, because, I think about when I went to school, the idea of doing a practice essay and emailing it to the teacher for feedback and annotation and everything else was just, I mean, it was not just foreign, it hadn't almost been invented, or at least in school. But actually going back to go, right, well, what is the point of the work that we're doing?
Yeah.
And that summative space can have incredible formative value, but being focused in a way, you know, working out a way or a protocol to go, look, this is how we give feedback effectively.
Yeah.
And this is, you know, we sometimes in senior English, we need to give a mark and we need to, you know, work through assessment schedules. But actually going back to how can we give the most meaningful feedback for learning out of this, and what does that look like? And it might be just some short written statements, and then you sit down one-to-one with somebody and do that verbal thing.
Yeah. And even the whole, you know, like conferencing with a student, I find that often having that conversation, I was a big fan of using a rubric and marking with the student, like co-marking and sort of getting their feedback on where they feel they need to go next, because often you learn so much, not only about them academically, but that like social and emotional side of their development as well. You get from those one-to-one conference opportunities, and embed it into your planning, into your programming. Make the time for that, I suppose, not as an additional extra that feels like you don't have enough minutes in the week. You know, as teachers, we're always looking for more minutes in the week. But yeah, it's something that after a few years, I really started to bring that into my classroom as a, you know, consolidated practice.
And what about what's working best with our students who are looking for a bit of challenge or extension within classes?
Yeah, look, it's been a really key and exciting part of my career, has been working in gifted education and our high potential and gifted education policy. That was something that I had studied in my postgraduate studies, and was fortunate enough to be a part of the research and development of what we now have as the high potential and gifted education policy. And that to me has been, you know, a really incredible part of being able to take some of my skills and knowledge and, you know, help contribute to our statewide picture. We are incredibly privileged, and we have a big challenge in New South Wales public education, because we need to be and provide that kind of educational opportunities to students from all backgrounds. And no matter where they are in the state, their culture, their religion, their community, their town, their football team, you know, we are their system. And for many of those students, particularly from some of our more disadvantaged backgrounds, we are often one of the few with only educational opportunities that are available. And we can't just assume that families or communities will be able to take things through. So it's a real challenge for us, but it also speaks to that equity mission of public education, because one of some of the most satisfying and incredible experiences have been teaching students who are seeking that challenge, but going beyond what they thought they could. We have students who are the first students to finish year 10, finish year 12, go to university and even think in that way. But that involves supporting students through the process as much as it is about challenging and extending learning, to make sure that students feel extended and so that they aren't bored in class. That's a real challenge for a lot of our learners.
Absolutely.
So what did that look like for you in an English classroom, for example?
So it's one where, you at any point in time, you might have you'll have your central unit, be it a text, a critical study, comparative study, all manner of interesting designs. But it is about ensuring that all students have an entry point that they can get into the work. Mm-hmm. So that kind of low floor, high ceiling type approach. And can be about helping students know that, okay, for some it might be focusing on these particular questions. It might be what we call tiered instruction type approaches. Following, that you're going to work on those first foundational questions and then move on. Other students, it might be, look, I want you to have a quick go at them, but I really want you to focus on these extension activities. I know where you're at with your writing, your paragraphing is coming along really well. I want you to have a go at extending that out
I'm having flashbacks.
That's right.
I've heard that before.
Yes. So
The feedback's always with you.
yeah, it's interesting because it's a more nuanced view of sort of actually planning our learning in a way that we can try and incorporate and be inclusive of as many learners as we can, but always ensuring that there is that extension step.
Yeah, well, it's part of your differentiation.
Exactly what you just described is good for all. It's not like you were describing something that's good for one student. You know, Shannon might be excelling in this certain type of text or in this subject, but the approach that you've just described would be good for Siobhan and Stephanie in that sense that, you know, there's an entry point for everybody. So I think that's a really achievable strategy that our early career and beginning teachers that are listening can try to adopt within their classroom in order to give everybody a chance to access the learning.
And sometimes you'll see it represented like coming from the primary space. It'll be your 1-star, 2-star, 3-star challenge.
Yep.
For example, or, you know, it can be branded however you work it in your classroom.
Must do, should do, something extra.
Can do.
in my
Yeah. Absolutely. Like there's a couple of different ways that you can present it, I suppose. Yeah, no, it's really good advice. We've spoken a little bit, we've touched around, you know, what works best. And I suppose what works best is not just really a saying in the education space. It's actually a piece of work in its own.
Yeah, a
Like,
whole
talk to us
suite of
about that.
resources. Absolutely. So when I came onto Common from school, I got to work with the great colleagues at CESE, the Centre for Education, Statistics and Evaluation. And being a teacher in that space, working in research, was about, we have a really rich vein of research into effective practice in the classroom. And that's where that what works message comes in. And as I went through my career and I heard a lot of things, I saw things on the internet, I saw influencers and tech companies spruiking certain ways of learning and the like, it started to kind of come down to, well, I'd really, you know, for all of the work we do as teachers and the sort of the effort and energy I put into my work and my craft, I want it to be effective. I don't want it to be just doing something because it's trendy or cool or interesting or I think it's fun, or maybe it's just fun for fun's sake. I want it to be effective learning so that students will not just work through a sequenced lesson, but learn and retain and can build on that information in future years. So those What Works Best suite of resources and the What Works Best publication were really about helping to summarize a lot of the research about effective teaching practices into some just really clear and tangible ways, and also examples of too, things like explicit teaching, formative assessment, and assessment more broadly. Having high expectations as a way to kind of think about, look, out of all of the different practices, these are the ones that we are confident are going to have the best impact for the broadest range of learners in our system.
Fantastic. We did a lot of work, professional development around it at my school. We assessed ourselves against the framework. And that was really interesting to sort of track ourselves and see how we were going. And then we embedded we did ghost walks within the school as part of the professional development. So we were able to identify what we saw in different classrooms and what we sort of like associated with what works best and seeing that comparatively. And it was a really nice time as a stage to sort of reflect on our practice, I suppose, and look for our like next step, our move forward with how we cater for our students in, you know, what's best practice.
Yeah, it gives us the opportunity and to remind us that we can have those moments to stop and talk about classroom practice, that it is important. And it's also a case of, look, these are 8 sets of classroom practices of teaching skills that we can prioritize. So it also gives us a chance to think about, well, what are some of the things that maybe we can just deprioritize a little bit? You know, I think about the effort that so many teachers put into decorating their classroom, and some of the learning spaces look amazing, but it's also a case of, while some of that might be good, which of these practices can I really focus on because we know they're going to have that greater impact? And for us too, in sort of even just as, you know, I've progressed through my career and been involved in leading a faculty or whole school projects or part of like school planning, in our system, our school excellence framework takes a lot of those elements into the way in which we plan and lead schools. So again, that we have that chance at a bigger school level or stage or faculty level to think about, okay, are we just hoping that teachers are teaching this way, or are we planning for it? Are we focusing on teaching practice, and are we, you know, our professional learning opportunities? Are we focusing on really what works best?
Yeah. And are we allowing our teachers the time and space to like start talking about it, look at the framework, how does it make sense for us? Because I think that's really important as well for us as professionals, because when you enter a faculty or a stage, any school, there's such a variety of where everyone is on their teaching journey, I suppose. You've got your beginning teachers, pre-service teachers who might be there in their professional experience. We're all sort of on this different learning. It's almost like a know your staff and how they learn.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And it's sort of the thing I've definitely taken away and realised as I've moved into leadership roles in schools is I'm actually taking a lot of my teaching practice. Because as a teacher, you're a leader of 30 learners.
Yeah.
You're leading through the learning. And in working with like my own faculty, with other teams across schools as well, I've worked with teachers who are highly experienced, far more than me, well and truly towards more twilight years of their career. But also at one point I had 5 first-year beginning teachers in my faculty.
Yeah.
And the thing we all share in common is our classroom practice.
Yeah.
It's just we're at different stages of mastery of different elements.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned before the school excellence framework, and for a lot of our listeners, they might be pre-service teachers who are out on their professional experience placement at the moment. They may hear these words, strategic direction, strategic improvement plan, school excellence. Could you sort of dive in a little bit more about the framework and what that is?
Absolutely. So I think that's a reflection in my career. When I was a prac teacher, an early career teacher, I was just focused on my classroom.
Yeah.
I was just so focused on and that's probably good in
That's
it's
so normal.
very normal. But as I became more confident and comfortable, I started to realize that, my classroom is part of a big, like a small city. Large high schools are a small,
We're a microcosm.
absolutely.
True.
That requires coordination and leadership. And our school plans are about how the school, both the leadership and the community, bring all that together as how we think about we use our resources. We plan for professional learning. We listen to the community and engage the community in learning through, be it the PNC, Aboriginal Educational Consultancy groups and community meetings. So the school plan is that coming together of so many different factors. And that's part of school leadership is thinking about, well, while we have the strategic objective that we want to work in this way or we want to focus on this, is how are we going to make that happen? How are we going to ensure that we implement the new curriculum or syllabuses? What's our plan for that? Where are we going to put together some time for collaboration or programming?
Yeah.
How are we, we've decided we really want to focus on our explicit teaching practice. So thinking about those kinds of objectives or initiatives that we might use, and also how will we know at the end that we've been successful?
Yeah. How can we measure that success?
Yeah. What does
That's
it look
right.
like for us?
Yeah, and the key part of planning is it's just the same as our classroom practice. Planning ensures that we have thought about it and we implement it as best as we can, and we don't leave it to chance. It's not just a random hope that this might all happen. We're working with young people who we need to, we're entrusted with their learning. So we need to make sure that we can have that plan there and have the bones and structure that then we like we do in the classroom, we adapt, we work with each individual person.
So from someone who, at a school level, myself, has, had a hand and worked on that strategic plan for the school, where as a beginning teacher or as a pre-service teacher, if I'm wanting to know more about a school and, the vision and what's to come, can I access that information publicly?
Yeah, so that's something that all of our public schools, we all publish on the website as part of the school's website. And it is because we are part of a community. It's not a secret. We develop our plans. We work with our community. That's a key part of our role in public education. So sharing those plans, goals, initiatives and things is part of what we do. And I think it is something of value just as you start to learn a little bit more about what schools are starting to focus on and start to see where you and your teaching practice, fits in on a really big scale and stage.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you're someone who doesn't know the system, I would definitely recommend accessing those resources, which are broadly and publicly available on each of the school's websites. You can just type in the school that you have an interest in. You could be applying for a job through JobFeed, whether it's temporary or permanent employment, or looking for some casual work at schools in your local area. Perhaps you've just moved to New South Wales.
Yeah.
So you can go onto the About Our School section and you'll find the school's plan there historically as well. So you can see the changes
report
of the school over time and look at what they're progressing towards now, and have a look and see how you can immerse yourself into that school's culture with their visions and values, because each school within our public school context is unique. And that's a given. So looking at the context that you're working in and how you can approach that is really important.
Schools constantly revisit their plan, and that's something we encourage. It's part of evaluative practice. We think about, okay, how are we going with implementing this? Are we getting the output that we want to see? Are we getting the response from students? Are there things we need to change or edit or mix up?
I really resonate with that, like pivoting with the school plan, because like look at what we do as teachers with our programming. So, I may have some prior knowledge that you two, not only were you Siobhan's English teacher at one point.
Year 10 English, never forget it. Spy who came in from the cold.
That's right.
One of the texts of the year.
Yes, it was.
But I do believe, we went through some turbulent times as a community, as a world, as a nation. And that sort of full circle saw you back with Siobhan, but in a collegial capacity.
That's right. Yes. In 2022, as we came out of the lockdowns and the pandemic, schools and education all around the world, but us in New South Wales, we went through a really hard time. And the impact of teachers who are unwell or isolating things meant that we had a lot of disruption. So some of us qualified teachers who are working in non-school based roles, we put up our hand to basically work as casual teachers. And for me, it was great. I really enjoyed it. It was often just 1 or 2 days a week for me. But it was still a chance to get back to, what I do and what I've done as a job. But one of the schools that I got asked to help out at, walk into the English faculty, and here I find...
Greeted by my smiling face.
That's right.
Good morning.
As I was covering the classes of the head teacher, which means I think you were sort of the relieving head teacher that day. So I'm going to say you were my boss.
And didn't it feel great? How the roles have reversed.
Absolutely. Look, you were good at making me feel welcome, showing me where things are, showing me the jar of instant coffee that was sitting in the kitchen. Very important to find.
Notable.
But also it was really wonderful to see, because as a teacher, you don't always get to see where your students have gone afterwards. And for someone like Siobhan, it was like, I'm seeing you as a teacher now. Rather than just knowing you went into teaching, you're there. And that was really wonderful. And it was a tough time for a lot of schools and for the profession. But the way in which people really banded together and looked after each other through that, I think is just a hallmark of our work and our people. And while, it was difficult, there were definitely some times that were very disruptive for students, and some of whom who had spent months like learning from home, all of the disruptions and challenges there. School was that place where we could get things back to normal and be part of a bigger community again, and part of all of those wonderful activities that so many students missed out on.
Yeah, absolutely. What a full circle moment.
Yeah, it was a sense of pride for me, I suppose. And I felt a sense of ownership, or like I had to show you what we were doing well, or how I could help you prove myself a little bit. So that was a really great day for me too. So I'll always reflect on that. Did you think that I would become a teacher, let alone an English teacher? You can be honest.
When I think back now, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if I ever wrote one of those report comments that are a coded message for talks a lot in class. Yeah.
Get up the receipts.
That's right. But a lot of it makes sense in that you had those skills of being able to talk and think and explain, but also like as a drama student and as a, just a general contributor, being interested in the rest of the class with those early signs of being that gregarious person who's part of a broader community. And for someone like Siobhan, going back to your most improved, it was also a good example of saying, no, I think I think you can extend yourself a bit
Oh,
further.
yeah. There was certainly, I do talk about one of my whys and reasons for becoming a teacher was because I probably needed people like you in my life to tell me that you're actually really capable. You just need to put in a bit more effort to be able to get there. And I knew that about myself, but for someone to recognize that in me was also really important. So it is part of my why of why I became a teacher, because I wanted to be that person for somebody else, and even earlier on in their high schooling journey, I suppose. So, and I have been, and I'm proud of that. And I'm proud of the people that have paved the way for me. So.
You should be very proud of what you've done. Yeah,
We're very proud of her.
yeah, that's right.
I'm very proud of her.
Yeah, good.
That's a nice little wholesome and
My esteemed colleague. I'm very proud of her. All right, well, that's all we have time for today. Unfortunately, I have thoroughly enjoyed this episode, hearing from Ben. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for your great work promoting public education and the best profession of all.
Exactly right.
He's done the outro for us. No, it's been really wonderful having you here talking about all things New South Wales public schools, especially from like a systematic level. I think it's wonderful to sort of get that lens for our listeners, and for myself and Siobhan as well. We love hearing from our guests and learning new things. So thank you. And until next time, we'll join you back on this couch and share this episode with someone you know who you think would benefit from listening. We'll see you next time. Bye. Thank you for tuning in to the Teach New South Wales podcast, where we explore the dynamic world of education. Don't forget to follow, like and subscribe to be notified when new episodes become available. You can find us on social media via our handle @TeachNewSouthWales. Until next time, keep learning, keep teaching and keep making a difference. This podcast is produced by the Teach New South Wales team from the New South Wales Department of Education.